Good late Tuesday, early Wednesday, meteorologist Casey Cloud here in the Weather Center right now, giving a look at those temperatures. I know it is late, 2 something in the morning when we're doing this live on now, the 1st of October, so getting in that fourth quarter of the year, and you do see some temperatures around southwest, south central Georgia, a little bit cooler, some 60s, but otherwise a lot of 70s on the board with just a 69 type rating around parts of western side of Jacksonville mixed in there. We're at 69 here east of Stark on our thermometer, but overall, more rural, some of these areas, so we have these lower numbers, but pretty warm, a little bit above average here. I know we've had the influence there of course, a Melda there toward the east, so we'll go ahead and broaden the view. You do see here a very nasty looking hurricane here on this vantage point. Granted, it's something that is moving away, though, thankfully. Didn't have near the influence on the U.S. that it could have, but we still had rip current risk and beach erosion problems. Still, we're having some of that, so still be aware. We still have a coastal flood advisory as we're looking here, so just something to kind of bear in mind. Toward those East Coast beaches, you have to be very mindful of that here, obviously, as we're looking at things and as we're tracking things. So, definitely something to be watching out for there. We have high surf advisory, so you have to just be kind of mindful, but you see that hurricane moving away. It definitely could have been way worse for the Carolinas. They still had some issues, surprisingly, in some ways, from the influence of it with the overall beach erosion causing some issues to some homes that were very, very vulnerable. But just a situation here, I mean, it's not even close, but it's just, some vulnerabilities there in a few spots. But I know you're looking at this, you're tracking this again, you see it moving away there. Compared, I'll back this up to 4 hours ago. You can see how it's a little bit further west, and you see it's further east now in general. I'll go ahead and put on some other information. You see our other hurricane out there. You see a lot of interactions here with all this, with Berto there, and you're just kind of seeing the situation on the view here. I'll go ahead and take off some of this because it gets kind of cluttered, to be quite honest. I might take off for quite a bit here, but you see Umberto there, and you can kind of see our two storms getting closer and interacting potentially here. One may be more extratropical as we look ahead, but this system here, in terms of Imelda, headed closer toward Bermuda here. You see how close that's going to be. If not, maybe make a direct hit on them even. It's a possibility toward Bermuda. That is just coming up here today, so that's definitely a cause for concern out there toward that part of the Atlantic Basin, that British Island territory. So you see those hurricane winds coming in on them. So, that's something they're having to watch out there. With Imelda, again, though, we got lucky here in the U.S. Just those coastal threats here, obviously, that we've been talking about for, a bit here. We don't have the logo red anymore because it's not, that type of situation. It didn't come into play here, thankfully, staying off the coast. I mean, we had that, curve out there. Umberto pulling it out there, and that's what we like to see, obviously. That's some good news for us here. We're still going to have some higher rain chances coming now toward our East Coast counties as we look ahead. So that is something that we do have to keep our eyes on here as we look ahead into toward the timeline. Those areas could see significantly higher totals than the rest of us here. We have, still some drought concerns across some areas. Could have some gusty conditions, not much rain like toward, maybe the Tallahassee region. But to the east or eastern counties, we have to watch because it could actually become a issue where we have some flooding. We have the coastal flood advisory, but we could have just quite a bit of rain here. The overall meteorological pattern, the winds, how things are setting up could be an issue here as we look ahead late weekend, and even in the early next week, it could impact Monday Night Football even in Jacksonville, Kansas City at Jacksonville there on ABC and ESPN. But again, just continuing to track things here in terms of all that. Again, you see our hurricanes moving out. Again, Bermuda could be in the, crosshairs though from a pretty nasty hurricane strike with Imelda here. So this could be a pretty big deal for that British area as we're looking out there, that British territory. So something they're having to watch there for sure. As you look, I know there's just general thunderstorm risk in the country today. You see that out there, parts of Kansas up through Minnesota. And that's something they're dealing with. You see some of that South Florida there, and the northwest part of the country, Pacific Northwest. You see a little bit of that there as well. So that's something we're kind of watching here in the Weather Center, but not too big of a deal here overall. So again, that's kind of the storyline there with all that. Again, you see, America moving away. I mean, it could have been a lot different. We were talking about the rough current rest. We were talking about the rough seas, surf, beach erosion, but could have actually had, in terms of the Carolinas, mainly a big impact, and just mainly the coastal issues there. Now, as we do look across the area, and we look even just outside of our area here, we look at Panama City, and we do need to talk about something here, on a sad note. Former WMVB, ABC 13 chief meteorologist there, Jerry Tabbitt, passing away at the age of 76. So, he was somebody that was on the air there in that market for, decades. He was there for Hurricane Oakland, Hurricane Dennis, helping the Panama City area get through those. And, even covering part, technically our area here, Liberty and Franklin, which is part of the Panama City DMA. So I know some of our, viewers maybe, familiar with his work. He passed away at the age of 76. He was retired in 2018. He started his days in 1989 after serving in the United States Air Force there. So he was a, veteran meteorologist and an actual United States veteran as well. Passing away at the age of 76 there. And he was, keeping tabs on the Panama City weather. He's keeping tabs on that weather. Liberty, Franklin counties. You see around Apalachicola there, and the like. So my thoughts and prayers go to his family during this difficult time. Now, as we talk about more meteorologists, not, tragic circumstances, but, other type of things going on here, making career moves, retirement and the like. I know WJXT meteorologist Mark Collins here, he left that station here recently, and he had a long stint, a couple different stations in Jacksonville. Congratulations to him on some great years in Jacksonville. I know he's an FSU alumnus. Just congratulations to him. He was also in Tampa for a while. But, he wrapped up his stint at WJXT there. So that's the news there. And then in terms of a retirement and in terms of that being officially announced there in Ward, Texas, I know, believe it or not, until I was about 5 years old, in the year 2000, I know, leaving Texas, but last year out there or so, Fox 4 KDFW hired meteorologist Evan Andrews for the morning shift, and he's been out there for 26 years, and he announced his retirement on Tuesday, and he's going to retire next Friday, October 10th, after 26 years there at KDFW, Fox 4, and I moved back here to Florida when I was 5. And, he was on TV there, and I actually met him at Rangers Ballpark, the old one there, right before we moved back. So, just had that little bit of interest in weather, of course, that grew even more around our area, meeting George Winterling and, learning from him. I was a little too young to really know what was really going on, I would say, well, except maybe seeing a chroma key there with Evan Andrews. But it was a temporary one at the ballpark there. Rangers Ballpark, they had something going there where they were going to different areas with the team. Tim Ryan, and he just retired a couple years ago. And believe it or not, that station there, Fox 4, KDFW, still have some other folks left on that station. That when I was 5 and we left there, and I'm 31, they're still working there. I mean, people that have been there even longer than Evan Andrews. But Evan Andrews, meteorologist on the morning shift there, retiring after 26 years next Friday, October 10th. Congratulations to him. So, as we go ahead and look back here toward our area, you can kind of see, again, the temperature trends. We're just going to have to watch some of those big football games. I know the Gator game against Texas, we don't have a graphic for it yet. But there could be some issues with that. With rain, we'll see. It's not a guarantee. The chances are higher. Ethan, though. I'll have to watch that Monday night game. I would say right now Sunday looks worse than Monday, and there's not a Sunday game in Jacksonville. So that might be, a good thing. By the way, real quick, talking about Jacksonville, we do need to congratulate the Jacksonville Jumbo Shrimp there. They had, great performance there in minor league baseball this year. And on that late Saturday night, I know I was watching it. They won that big title out there in Las Vegas. So that walk-off home run, you know, pretty exciting for them. They're the International League champions there in AAA baseball. So that's exciting. First AAA titles in 1968 for them. The Jacksonville Jumbo Shrimp. I don't know if we've ever talked about them on here, but congratulations to that group of players there. We'll see some of those probably go to the major leagues. I know they're a Marlins AAA affiliate. I know there's Major League Baseball playoffs going on now, big games on that Tuesday being played in Chicago there, as well as Cleveland, Los Angeles, and up there in the Northeast. I know Boston getting a win in that game up in the Northeast, and then it was the Detroit Tigers upsetting Cleveland there. In terms of the siege of an upset, you also had the Dodgers beating Cincinnati, and then you had, of course, that game out there on ABC, the Chicago Cubs beating the San Diego Padres. So that's the storyline there. I know there'll be, games, more again today. Game 2 in those series, best of 3. And then those winners of those series will move on to play the top 2 seeds in the AL, the NL, based on, how it's set up with the bracket, of course. As we look here back at Helene, though, again, one of the country's most impactful hurricanes ever. Just absolutely tragic here, all the way up through western North Carolina. That anniversary is last Friday night. Can't ever look past this storm. It was retired for, obvious reasons. One of the worst we've ever seen. So many fatalities up there. We had some local fatalities. One is one too many, obviously, but, it was even worse up toward western North Carolina. We had a lot of fatalities there in Georgia, the Augusta area, because of trees falling on homes and night in general. There, the winds were, maybe a little bit more than what people were thinking they could be. Because the track kind of shifted. There's expectation of problems, but it worsened on them in the night because it was going so quick, headed east, and not good. Waycross, we had problems in our area, some of the southeast Georgia communities. We always talk about how this is that, benchmark storm all the way from Perry and Taylor County, all the way through that Waycross area, and even, just some of those, other areas there in South Georgia across, Valdosta, Amondos as well. Just got to keep everybody in our thoughts and prayers. Since we, gotten lucky this year. We didn't get lucky last year. We didn't get lucky the year before the Dahlia. And last year was Milton, Helene, and Debbie. Just you can't ever forget about these storms. There's just, who knows? Of course, we still got to watch in October. I'm not saying this isn't a forecast, but, sometimes we can go a really long time without anything, and then sometimes we have a whole bunch, and we can't forget about what happened. We can't forget about the damage. We can't forget about the victims. I know, from the end of 2005 there with Wilma, that was the last hurricane to hit Florida here until 2016 with Hermine. So, even though sometimes you want to think, well, it happens every year, it does not. And, in between those years, even though they weren't hurricanes, we had like Faye in 2008. We had Debbie and Beryl even, but especially Debbie in 2012. Those were big, impactful systems, even though they're tropical storms. So we got to remember that tropical storms can be a big, big deal, even if they're not hurricanes. These tropical cyclones that are coming across. So we've got to keep that in mind here. We've got to remain alert for anything. You can have long stretches of problems with big hurricanes, and you have stuff that, well, it doesn't sound like a big deal, but it is. You can obviously, there's other kind of weather makers that can be problems. Severe weather, squall lines, tornadoes, all sorts of stuff, even just lightning strikes in general. And not as really a concern for our area. Granted, it technically can happen. We talked about it before. Of course, you can always, look across other parts of the West Coast, especially have to watch out for earthquakes and tsunami threats. Hawaii, So that's something, we just can't ever let our guard down meteorology just because you don't have a big one this year. And we still could. It's possible. There's just some signals in the Gulf. It's nothing overwhelming yet. Watch. We got to pay attention. Don't get me wrong. I'm not riding the season off by any stretch here, but, it doesn't, sometimes I feel like people are, and even sometimes, and I know Imelda, it was not much of anything. If it would have taken the track, and we were thinking late Friday, it would have been a big deal for the Carolinas, and it would have justified some of the coverage, but I feel like sometimes, we decided just not to really talk about it too much. We just posted because it's just it for the coast. We had some issues, some beach closures. Delano Beach sure had some issues there with the beach erosion, but that happens in nor'easters and the like. I mean, overall, this wasn't a big deal. We didn't really treat it like that. I'm talking about Adalia. Let me go ahead and Imelda, excuse me. I mean, it's so many, but of course, Adalia was a very big deal, but Imelda, not a big deal here. As I go ahead and switch graphics for a minute, I don't want to confuse people because, but Imelda here moving away, and, it didn't take the track it could have taken there. Sometimes things can get a little overhyped, to be quite honest. I know if there's legit threats like Faye in 08, that's a big deal, really big deal. And Debbie in 2012 was a really big deal, but, maybe if you're not from our area, you might not realize that, but they were big deals, trust me. But this is not a big deal about it. This coastal issues for very confined areas, and you get that in nor'easter. But Imelda moving away here, obviously, and that is a good thing. Umberto watching that, of course, Imelda will be an issue for Bermuda. That's something they're gonna have to contend with out there toward that British, area there. As you're looking and as you're tracking things. So that's something that they have to be mindful of. Here, out toward Bermuda, that British Island territory. But as we go ahead now and see the names, and I know I'm surprised I haven't done that more with Imelda and Adalia, because Imelda was a big storm 6 years ago. That probably should have been retired, that name. It just had so many bad eye names over the years and decades, they didn't do it. But that was, one we were covering here. We weren't officially really cloud weather necessarily with, regular updates yet. But we were covering Imelda 6 years ago, and it's kind of, for Texas and that area, it's kind of weird hearing that again, quite honestly, after 40 or so inches of rain in some areas from that. And then Adalia was a big deal for our area. Could have been retired, wasn't either. So that's going to be even crazier, but the names aren't that far apart in the way they are, and so you got to be kind of careful, obviously, as we're tracking things. Of course, those are, it goes, if you don't know how this works here, and it used to be different, but years ago, decades ago, but, and not like this with maybe, some of the, but, we have different extra name lists and the like, and we're not talking about that because we've had the Greek alphabet with that at points. But with this, it goes, and this year, of course, Andrea, that is a female name, Barry's a male name, and it goes in that order. Chantal, female, Dexter, male, Aaron, female. I mean, technically, as you're looking at this, though, we're just kind of looking at the names yourself, so as we're looking and as we're tracking things, but that's how the order goes. But Umberto, Imelda there, just, the governmental Lord Jerry would be the next name there, as we're looking and as we're tracking things, so, and then Karen in 13, when I was at FSU, that might have been we did have Storm in 15 as well, but we had a couple false alarm type systems, quite honestly, that, kind of thought, oh, it might come toward Tallahassee, and nothing really developed at all out of those. Imelda kind of like that this year in some ways. We had Joaquin that year, of course, which was tragic to the east of, the U.S., and, impacted that, the El Faro there, all those people passing away, but it was in 15, but, of course, in 13, we had false alarm with Karen, and I think 15 was Erica, yeah, as I recall, and then, that was a false alarm, but in 16, it was a very real threat, and, big consequences with Hermine, and then after that, it was Hermine, Matthew, Irma, of course, and I'm gonna leave some out, but, this is, this is so expansive, Michael, and, of course, we had Adalia, and Dorian went to these, but it was not, it was a Cat 5, very bad for the Bahamas. You had, of course, then Debbie, Helene Milton. We had Harvey in Texas. We had just so many storms. Ian, of course, that's one I sometimes, because it didn't hit us too bad up here. It was one of the worst hurricanes ever. I mean, just so many bad hurricanes. Maybe, and we still got to watch, but maybe this is gonna be the year. It was looking like for a while that was gonna be the case, and Imelda started to give us that concern for the Carolinas with a big flood threat. Pretty, reasonable, and well thought of models were giving them 20 plus inches of rain up there. That didn't happen because it was a very complicated pattern, turning away instead because of the influence of Umberto. If Umberto wasn't there, it might have just kind of been an issue more for the Carolinas. But Umberto Cat 5 at one point pulled Imelda away. So that's good news for the U.S. Of course, Bermuda, not so much. But for the U.S., that's good news. We haven't really had anything. We had Chantal hit the U.S. We did, of course, have the influence of Barry be a big problem there earlier this year. Even though it's not, we weren't really using that name. At that point, it had been off the, it had been crossed off for a while. It had been crossed off for a while there in terms of it being used, but it had the influence in that terrible Texas Hill Country flooding. So I suppose, that may get retired. I don't know. I mean, if you made that point, you should say Melda's got retired 6 years ago. In some ways, sir, it's very tricky, and all of these systems have had different tragedies with them. Of course, Barry, even though it wasn't even Barry for a while after that, it was terrible. All those, folks passing away there. In that river area there, this awful, dozens and dozens of people, young girls losing their life, even though it wasn't something that was actually that system. It was partially because of that, not directly, but very indirect. But, that influence was there over land several days after it was a hit. Mexico was a tropical depression. It wasn't even a tropical storm when it hit down there. So very odd scenario there. I know Dora in the Pacific got retired. Of course, we had Dora here, and that's not a name here anymore in the Atlantic either. But in the Pacific, Dora got retired after it influenced the Hawaii wildfires. So I've got to wonder if Barry, because it influenced the, flooding in Texas, they may go and retire it because they don't have that many names on this year's list to have to retire so far. So they may go ahead and do that. The World Meteorological Organization, we shall see. But Jerry, Karen, Lorenzo, Melissa, Nestor, 6 years ago we were watching as well in the Gulf and the like. And tornado threat there in Polk County from that. But, those are your next names. Hopefully we don't get much past that. And that'd be good news. But that's, 5 more names there. Again, Jerry, Karen, Lorenzo, Melissa, and Nestor. And Nestor, I know it's different pronunciations. I know guy 6 years ago said Nestor. But, different pronunciations here that I guess you could use. But that's your next list, of names ahead. So let's go ahead and move along. Again, there's where Imelda and Umberto are. You can see them there. Now, Umberto, going back 18 years ago, was the biggest. It went from nothing to a hurricane within about 24 hours in East Texas there. So, like Imelda was 6 years ago, problem East Texas. Umberto was 18 years ago. Umberto didn't want me to quit here to retire, but it was, in a period where we hadn't had much and didn't have them much overall, 7. And all of a sudden you go from nothing to, I remember, I said this the other day, but I remember waking up, so I was going to school and so I wasn't staying up late, but after I went to bed, Umberto, all of a sudden, went from, tropical storm. Okay, I'm thinking, well, when I turn NBC Weather Plus on the next morning with Bill Cairns, it's going to be, tropical storm hitting some issues. Sure, as we talk about tropical storms, a big deal. But all of a sudden, they were saying it's a hurricane or intro. What? Did they make a mistake? No, it was a hurricane hit Texas there, and it was still, I think, a hurricane that morning, which, wow, just unbelievable. Mind-blowing stuff, quite honestly, how that happened in 2007, especially, I wasn't that old, and we haven't seen much like that since then, even, so that was on 07 toward Texas there, and Imelda, again, we said 6 years ago in 2019, that was one that was a big problem, 40 plus inches in some areas, so, big, those names are memorable. Sure. I think Imelda probably should have been retired. Umberto, not so much, but, Imelda should have been retired for what happened 6 years ago. It goes down with storms like Alberto in 94. That name shouldn't be used again. Really, Idalia, we kind of, when we talked about it before, well, maybe not, because, and then Alina went up it, for, our area there. There's different counties we've always been talking about here, third of the area, but, maybe Idalia could have been as well, but it was a little bit trickier because it was still historic for the area at that point, but it was something that could have been worse, in terms of the geography, and obviously Helene, even that same area, even if it was more rural, proved that the next year or so. kind of crazy when you look at it like that, but it's all kind of subjective in some ways with the, different things there and the like. But here's your tropical climatology. I know you can see, looking at that, we're now in October. It's October 1st now. We still have to be paying attention to, storms per 100 years are still pretty high on this list here. And, I've talked about it on here before, about October 10th, we really have to pay attention. Granted, even in November we had Eta there, going back a few years ago. It was a bigger deal in South Florida than it was here. But, of course, we had Milton. We also had Michael and Matthew around October 10th. We had Wilma there even later than that, back in 05. So that was down South Florida. So you still have to be paying attention. Rainfall forecast next 7 days. This is what I'm talking about with our rain concern local, because of a tropical system directly. Now, there could be something in the Gulf, in theory, that develops, but, the East Coast, the overall pattern here with the winds, I know you can go to clutter.com/radar to get an interactive look at things, but you can see our eastern counties there. Some areas could get, on average, about 4 inches or so. So that's something to be mindful of for sure. Less to the east, Tallahassee, not as much, but there's still going to be some issues for that game there on Saturday night on ABC. The number 3 Miami Hurricanes 4-0 at the number 18 Florida State Seminoles 3-1. That game on ABC. There in the ACC network, I know former coach Jimbo Fisher will be part of that broadcast there in the ACC network. They also have ACC Huddle there, 10 to noon, I believe the time frame is on that Saturday morning. FSU losing last week to Virginia, didn't get ESPN College Game Day, but they got an ACC Huddle. Jimbo Fisher, that legendary coach there that won a national title in 2013 when I was there. That'll be always something memorable, him and that team. What a, perfect season. That's something I know they've done here a few different times in history. So, just incredible. But, that pregame there from 10 to noon there, ACC Huddle, in the Doak Campbell Stadium area. I'm not sure if they're going to be on. I know Langford Greensboro used to have game day when I was there, but I don't know if they're going to be there or a different spot, maybe in the stadium or somewhere around there. But, fans are invited for that. I think even... I think maybe even some perks, maybe according to the athletic director, for some folks that show up for that ACC Huddle. So the country, how excited we are about Seminole football. ACC Huddle on the ACC Network, hosted live from FSU from 10 a.m. to noon on Saturday morning. I know Taylor Tannenbaum, she's going to host it. She's an ACU alum. CC, hosted that soon on the ACC Network. 4 different people there. Just exciting stuff for sure. That group of folks there. So 2 people with FSU ties on that broadcast there. I think EJ Manuel's now in the studio on ESPN2, maybe one of the ESPN2, one of those channels there. So he's not part of that necessarily anymore, but he's been on that channel for a while. Mark, I think he's more in the studio on the ACC Network now, former offensive coordinator for the Seminoles and head coach for Miami. I know. Exciting for this game too. Lee Corse is expected to be there to get honored after his illustrious career, as a college football icon there. And you see upper 70s, so 40% chance of rain. There's a chance, not as high as our eastern areas for sure, but it'll be breezy. Maybe not quite as breezy as some of our area, but showered, even an isolated thunderstorm possible. I know the joke was there. When I was there, and it still is. I think I saw it up this week on Twitter. A hurricane flag up at the FSU facility there to warn the impending Miami Hurricanes that there's no threat toward the U.S. with anything. Kind of mentioned that as kind of a fun thing, when there's not a hurricane coming toward the U.S. Anyway, still concerns, otherwise in the basin as we've alluded to. But, the Ward Tallahassee, no actual hurricanes coming, but the Hurricanes of Miami, they are coming. They're a powerful team. Mario Cristobal, Carson Beck, that team there, undefeated. I have number 1 in my rankings. They're, very well thought of in this country. As you see, they're the ACC champion in my projection. I know my poll. It's weird. I don't know if I've ever diverged this much here with my rankings over the years. I mean, we all, know FSU should have been in the playoffs in 2023. But besides that, I mean, a lot of people are on the same page. This is pretty different than a lot of folks here, but it's still early. I think it'll become more clear as we get later on in the season. Miami, though, we'll see. They had that win against Florida. It could have looked a little bit better, but they beat USF by so much there. High, big, margin of victory there. Ohio State number 2. That was impressive. Julian Sand, the quarterback there, going out to UW there, Washington, and getting that win. Oregon, what a win that was against Penn State in double overtime. Number 4 there, Indiana, Fernando Mendoza and his squad there. They're my 3rd Big Ten team. I have my number 4. That's way higher than everybody else. That was impressive to beat Iowa there on the road. I mean, in that type of game, that's a trap game really for them, and they got it done. They'll be playing Oregon coming up soon, and Oklahoma, Texas play pretty soon next weekend as well. Iowa State, number 5, I have them higher than everybody else. Big 12, I think pretty highly that conference. Arizona State's not on here, but they're a team to watch. This is Tech there. Even TCU was a team to watch, but they lost there in, areas there of Arizona. I think it's Tempe. Trying to do that off the top of my head. Remember where that game was last Friday night after FSU's lost there against UVA, which is a very tough environment for the Noles. And we'll get to the Noles, on this graphic here again in a moment. But, what a great offensive performance there by Gus Malzahn's offense. But the defense, that was not, something where, maybe you're expecting them to have that many issues. And, something that needs a lot of improvement there, the defense, to be quite honest, for the Noles. But we'll see how that works there. Tony White, the defensive coordinator, see if he can get the job done this week and weekend against Miami at Doak Campbell Stadium under the lights. And then you see Oklahoma, their quarterback got hurt, so we'll have to see how they perform coming up. But they're number 7 here. They're the SEC champ. I have them, higher than Ole Miss. Ole Miss, I think, was number 4. But I don't think LSU's that good. So then all of a sudden you're saying Ole Miss better beat them at home and you move them to 4. It didn't make sense. And they have a backup quarterback who, I think he's pretty good, but you gotta, you gotta be kind of careful here. Texas A&M's pretty impressive there. I know, that was a really good one at Notre Dame, considering how good I think Notre Dame actually is after they beat Arkansas. You can see, I have them in here, one of the teams just not far out, even though they've lost 2 games already. Doubt they're going to lose, the rest of the year based on their schedule, and if they don't, they probably deserve to be in, assuming everybody stays healthy there, like their quarterback, star quarterback, and quarterback CJ Carr. Ole Miss there, again, we've alluded to them with, their quarterback, the backup in there, but he's done well. Penn State, Drew Aller, he had that issue there, double overtime, that interception, but, still can't, take them all the way out for losing a double overtime. FSU was a little different, because it was an unranked team at that point. Texas, Tech here, of course, that was a great win against Utah recently, but you see here on this graphic here that you just gotta consider, Penn State, that was still double overtime where they lost to Oregon, even though it was at home. FSU was on the road, they weren't ranked. Oregon's really high ranked, so you can't just take them all the way out because of a loss like that. Georgia Tech there, they probably should have lost. They got lucky with a call in that game against Wake Forest. I thought about having FSU and Georgia Tech just out. I feel like that's how it's going to be later in the year. Something, or at least Georgia Tech not in. I took them down quite a bit here in this because they really shouldn't have been. They should have been called for offsides. The game would have been over. They'd have lost them and way out of here. But they're 5-0. You got to give them credit for that. For now, USF they're in because even though they're not number 12 in my mind, they're 12th seed because they'd be the team that gets that highest in theory conference championship type of mark there in terms of being the highest ranked, maybe only ranked team outside Power 4 to win their conference title and be in the top 25. As you see, first team's out, FSU, I alluded to them. Of course, Tommy Castellano is there. He did really well. The Noles offense did really well. Deuce Robinson and the like. But, the defense was not good. And that's some of the worst defense I've seen from FSU in a long time in a big game where, the offense was doing so well. I don't know if I've ever seen that, quite honestly, that I can recall when the offense was doing that good. Missed the field goal there, Jake Weinberg. I'm sure he'll improve. And, it was a, tough environment. It was kind of, if you saw the fans there, it's one thing about storming the field, but being right there down on the players like that and just able to run in so quick, not something that, I would want to have to be dealing with, thinking that last play, like, before it even, transpired, I'm thinking, wow, goodness, if you might just have to be ready to run out of here, and even if, not be thinking about the play, but thinking about running out of here because you're afraid you're going to get trampled. And it was scary looking there on TV and based on different reports there in Charlottesville with all the fans just, within a second or so of the play ending, They're already on the field. Players, some of them were still down. So that was a scary situation there with everybody kind of running on in there in that contest Friday night. Alabama there, you got to give them credit, but they don't deserve to be in the rankings yet because FSU beat them head to head. Later in the year, it's possible. I mean, with the way FSU's defense plays, possible we find out maybe Alabama is the better team despite FSU's head-to-head victory. But we don't have enough yet to just, all of a sudden throw that out and put Alabama way higher. It's too early. Too early to do that. Texas there, Arch Manning, we'll see how he does against Florida. Florida's not that tough of a team in general, but they did have a bye week, and they're a little bit better than we think. And, the way Texas has been playing lately, they could impress in that game, but if they don't, there'd be cause for major concern for them. Notre Dame, they've been really impressive. I know they lost their first 2 games. It's crazy to even have them on here when they, started 0-2 and now 2-2, but they've been incredible. I mean, quite honestly, it's a very odd thing, but I think they're better than OSU and Georgia. Maybe better than a lot of these teams up here. It's just they did lose the first 2 against 8 and 1. I mean, you could put them at 9 maybe, but it's too early to do that because of the 2 losses. And that one against Texas A&M was at home, so Texas A&M might be a little bit better than we think. We'll see. You see our forecast now: 20% chance of rain on your Wednesday, 30% on that Thursday, going up to 50% on that Friday. There, 2 to 4 inches of rain though. Possible in our eastern counties with isolated 7-inch totals, maybe a little higher, 7+ inch totals, and especially Clay, Duval, Flagler, Nassau, Putnam, St. Johns, and Camden counties. I know your highest rain chances on Sunday at 60%. Really, the eastern counties are, more 60-70% here for that whole stretch, and western counties not as high generally, for that 5-day stretch, which could even continue beyond that. So that could be a lot of rain. Could be. I don't want to go any higher than that because the models aren't yet, but some of the high reds might go higher than 7+, but a lot less toward the west. I mean, it might be very little rain for a lot of our counties, so they're not turning logo red or anything, but for that, confined stretch there, Clay, Duval, Flagler, Nassau, Putnam, St. Johns, Camden really could be an issue. Could end up stretching into Glenn, maybe Charlton, maybe here in Bradford as well. We'll see Baker. We'll see, how that transpired with the overall pattern there. But a lot of that shower action clustering along the coast there. The overall wind pattern plays a big role with that. We'll have to watch that for sure. Coastal flood advisory in play. We have that at least until Friday, I believe. Let me double check that, but that's not directly because of the rainfall here. As we're tracking things, I know it's just always important to stay on top of things here. As we're looking, as we're monitoring things, we do have that alert. Coastal flood advisory. They sent an update recently until 5 a.m. on Friday for parts of Flagler and St. Johns. And then the Clay, Putnam, Duval as well. So, but in a large parks and roads with isolated road closures possible, only that would be what you'd expect. We have a high surf advisory some of these areas all the way till Sunday, and I gotta be really careful. Breaking waves there, 7 to 10 feet, parts of Flagler, St. Johns, and the like. So be very mindful of that. So yeah, some of our area, lower toward the West Starks, kind of probably close to these rain percentages. West Tallahassee's lower in general. East, like if you're in, let's say, Jack's Beach, St. Augustine, you'd probably say 60, 70, 80% here even. I may even go higher than that for Friday through Tuesday. So it's a variation in our area, a little bit more so than you would generally see here outside of like a tropical system or something. It's a pretty big difference. That's why I put that on there, that kind of note, because, this is a good broad brush. And if you want to kind of talk about Stark here, where we're at in Bradford, these percentages about what you'd say for Bradford. But some areas to the east are quite a bit higher, west and north, lower. So that's kind of your storyline with that as you're looking at it, as you're tracking things. So, got to be aware of that, obviously. Could have some, isolated flash flood warning, turn around, don't drown. St. Augustine has a tendency to flood here with quite a bit of rain in a short period. It might be over a longer period where it actually could be helpful if there's, the drought concern for your area. But at point, it could start to pile up, and it's hard to say. We don't have guidance in yet on that, so it's possible. We've had this before in this time of year where stuff starts to really pile up, and then that starts to become a real flash flood problem. So it's hard to say on that right now, but I will continue to watch that here for you in the Weather Center. So we always like to stay up, late here and give you the latest based on the latest guidance coming in, because, you see some updates here that come in during the night, so that can be kind of helpful, even a little later than some people's bedtime with this update. But and I'm trying to help you guys out here. Then that's going to go ahead and pretty much do it here for tonight. I'm meteorologist Casey Cloud here in the Weather Center. I thank you so much for tuning in here. Thank you so much for trusting me. I'll be back late Thursday unless we need to pop back in earlier. Again, have a great night. You see all the different platforms are on. We have clutter.com. We have the interactive radar on there. So just kind of stay tuned for all that here, obviously. Again, I appreciate everybody watching. Just continue to watch out here for the different things, locally. Mainly going to be our eastern counties where we're watching, the Atlantic coast counties. So we'll be tracking all that here for you and giving you the latest updates. Not an alert situation. If you're always seeing escalation and some of that, we would go maybe back to that alert logo. We had that concern late Thursday for, of course, Imelda, but that is something that was just about the rip currents. The beaches still have some of those concerns at the coastal areas with the, busy Atlantic, but not really direct, impacts here, especially not toward those land areas. That's what we like to see. So, I mean, technically, it may be passing shower, you could attribute to it, but yeah, not. Inland areas, maybe a passing shower, but that's about it. Not a big deal. That's what we like to see. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great night.